Hello and welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. With us today, Moshe Weinger. He's from Yeshiva University, from Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, and he has a wonderful Parshat to talk about, Parshat Yitro. So hello and thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited.
Parshat Yitro begins with the advice given by Jethro to Moses. Jethro is Moshe's father-in-law. And then we continue to stand near the Sinai, and we, namely the people of Israel, receive 2 tablets and 10 commandments. The giving of the Torah is in our Parsha. The Parsha begins with this pasuk, וישמע יתרו כהן מדיין חותן משה את כל אשר עשה אלוהים למשה ולישראל עמו, כי הוציא אדוני את ישראל ממצרים. Jethro, priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. So let me begin with what might sound like a stupid question, but that's the question I have. Do we really have 10 commandments? Because I counted time and again, and it might be 9, it might be 11. I'm not that sure.
So I want to tell you, when I love the question. I absolutely love the question. I love the question for several reasons. One, it shows a very perceptive reading of the text. There's a popular rabbi in the Orthodox community named Rabbi David Foreman. He has this he has this idea of the lullaby effect, that so many of us know so many stories from our youth, and we don't even know what's true about them, what's not. We know so many midrashim, so many, let's call it kind of extra interpretations of the stories that are beyond the text, that we don't even know how to read the text anymore.
Right.
So your question rightfully asks, what are these series of Dibros? Why are there 10? What are the 10? And so kol kavod, thank you for giving it.
And the Torah never says 10. It doesn't the Torah doesn't count them for us.
Right. Doesn't have 1, 2. So the truth is, and this is the first question I suppose we should ask, is where does this idea of 10 come from? And the answer is the Torah does say. The Torah has several psukim throughout the Chumash that refer to a series of Dibros. 10 Dibros, often referring to them into the context of a bris, of a covenant, right? Now, there are many different interpretations as to what exactly those 10 are. It does seem, going through the literature, that there is an accepted 10, and the question becomes, how exactly do we get to that accepted 10, which is what we generally know, starting from Anochi, I am Hashem, your God, and ending with, do not covet your neighbor's house, do not covet your neighbor's wife, etc. How do we get to there?
Yeah, and both the first one and the last one are problematic, because the first one is not really a commandment, and the last one is really 3 different commandments. So
right. There's even a few in between that you can read into several different commandments.
True.
Depending on which ta'amim, which cantillation you use, you can read everything. You can read the number differently depending on the parshiot, where that's called them indentations and the empty spaces in the Chumash and the Torah is. You can read everything differently. It's very interesting to figure out and exactly tease out how Chazal, how the sages of the Mishnah and the Talmudic era came to the 10 that they came to. But it seems that, as I said before, starting with Anochi, the one that you pointed out, which, very good point, it doesn't even sound like a mitzvah. It doesn't sound like there's a lashon tzivui, a commandment there. But that does sound to be, that is considered, according to everyone, to be the first commandment, and ending with the last one, even though it sounds like 2 or maybe even more, of lo sachmod. So I guess the first question we really should be asking in order to get down to the bottom of that is, what are the seres dibros? What are the 10 commandments?
Right.
What are their point? Meaning, we have in Orthodox Judaism, we know 613 commandments. So let me ask you, what are the 10 commandments? What's their significance? What do you think?
Well, I don't know. These are the main laws that we were given as the first layer of things that we must obey or do or understand about the world.
Right. I like how you put there the first layer. So in a certain sense, the way I like to think of it, and this seems to be a consensus amongst many of the classical commentaries, is this idea of a first layer, an introduction of sorts. But also there's this element of a covenant. First of all, I have to point out lots of Rishonim, lots of medieval scholars like to say that there's all 613 commandments are really contained within the 10. Famously, Rav Saadia Gaon, one of the Gaonim, has a work in which he tries to divide all 613 mitzvot into the 10.
The 10 categories. It's like 10 categories. Right.
In a certain sense, it makes sense then that Hashem, God, would start off with 10 categories, kind of getting us used to the conceptual or experiential categories of Judaism, of mitzvot, of the Torah. There's another idea that I love from Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And he says, if you look at the Aseres Dibros, they go in the following pattern. They start with belief. Anochi Hashem, I am God, believe in me. And we'll get there in a second. You asked
right, yeah, because it doesn't say believe in me. That's just your invention or imagination.
Right. So it seems to start with belief. Lo tisa Hashem Hashem b'shav means don't take a false oath. Next goes to speech. And then it goes back into action, right? Speaking about Shabbos, which involves lots of abstention and lots of active mitzvot, lots of active commandments, and honoring your parents, bringing it down to the home. So it goes from belief all the way to action, and then from action down to belief. The next set of mitzvot, of dibrot, right? Start with action: don't kill, right. Don't steal. Go again down to speech: don't bear false testimony, and then go back down to that's called a cognitive or belief. Don't covet your neighbor. It's something, again, internal. So we start from the internal and we go to action, and then we go from action to internal.
Right.
I think Rav Hirsch is pointing out that these are meant to show you the gemut, the entire perspective of what are the mitzvahs going to contain. They contain everything from your beliefs down to your actions. And again, from your actions down to your beliefs. And why is it we understand famously that the first 5 dibrot all have to do with our relationship to God, and the next 5 dibrot have to do with our relationship to others.
Right.
Right? So why does it start from belief to action when it comes to Hashem, to God, and then from action back down to belief when it comes to others? I think the idea is like this. Again, the reason I'm saying this, I think it just gives a good framing of the Seir Dibrot and to understand why they are that first layer, as you said.
Right.
When it comes to Hashem, obviously intangible, beyond conception, beyond logic, we might think that the only way to approach him is the most disembodied of our faculties by thought. Our deeds, our family life, what's the shaykhus, as we say? What's the relationship to him? And the answer of the Torah is absolutely every component of your life has to be with an awareness and an orientation towards Hashem. And then in the reverse, with other people, you might think the whole point is just to act correctly. Just do the right thing. What does it matter what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, though?
Right.
And to that, the Torah's response as well is it has to be imbued with you to the extent that you don't even feel covetousness, whatever the English word is, that you don't feel this pull towards each other's things. Yeah. You have to have such a sense of boundaries and such a respect for the other that you shall not covet.
Right.
And I think that's the idea. This is kind of the framing of the 10 Commandments, in a certain sense, conceptual categories, showing you the entire gemut of mitzvot and the Torah. So I want to get back to the main question I think we were asking is a little bit more of a Parshanut question, a little bit more of just exegetical.
Yeah, we started with counting, with asking about the number of
right.
commandments.
So how is Anochi a mitzvah?
Right.
Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem your God. Asher Tzeicha me'eretz Mitzrayim took you out of Mitzrayim mi'beis avadim, from a house of bondage. Where's the mitzvah there? It just sounds like a statement. There's really 2 questions there. Not only is how is it phrased as a mitzvah, but even if it is a phrase as a mitzvah, you can have a commandment to believe that someone is commanding you, right?
Well, that's similar to the commandment not to covet anything, because it goes into your inner self.
Right, which is why I was so excited to hear you ask them both of those.
Yeah.
Because there's and as I just kind of pointed out, they both have to do with the deepest core of our being, with our beliefs and our cognitive orientation towards Hashem. So just in terms of Parshat Nut, there are several approaches of how to read that pasuk as an actual tzigli. right? And I'll just point out the Gemara already, the Talmud seems to understand that Anochi is a mitzvah. It says that 600 Torah is the numerical equivalent of 611, right? So Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, he only gave us 611 commandments. The other two were told to us directly by Hashem. What were those? Anochi Hashem and Lo Saselecha, right? Do not have other gods. So they seem to include it as two mitzvot, right? Anochi, the Gemara. So we have to understand, where's the Gemara coming from? Where are Chazal coming from? The Orthodox perspective, of course, is always to look at the words of our sages and understand where they're coming from, as opposed to just wiping them away. So a couple approaches is one, you can just try to read the commandment in there. Rav Hirsch understands that Anochi Hashem, Asher Hotzesicha, right? Asher can be understood as that, or can even be understood as because. I apologize. This is actually the interpretation of the Das Mikra. This is the Chumash that Moshe Rav Kook put out. I apologize. I have to always make sure I'm quoting the right people. But they explain that
that's one of the 630 mitzvot is to quote the right people.
Right. So Das Mikra explains, because I took you out of Mitzrayim, I took you out of one place of bondage. Where are you now? You think I'm just going to let you run free? Because I took you out, you should thus acknowledge me as your Lord. So that Asher, in a certain sense, is the implied commandment, the implied, let's call it responsibility that we now have to Hashem. The other way of reading it is, as Rav Hirsch says, which I meant to bring up first, is Anochi could just be read as I am to be. Not just I am Hashem, but I should be Hashem, your God. So, okay, there's two potentials. I think in a certain sense, for me, the more fundamental question is exactly how are you supposed to, as you said, it's a similar idea to Lo Sachmod, but how are you supposed to be commanded to believe that someone's commanding you? If I don't believe that you're there, I don't believe that you're worthy of giving me commandments, why should I listen to your commandments? Right? How could that be part of the 10? So there are those classical commentaries, including Rabbeinu Kreskes, classical medieval commentary, that says, indeed, it's not. He argues in it says that shouldn't be counted. And so maybe he's going to count Lo Sachmo twice, like you suggested.
Right.
But most Rishonim, most sages seem to say that it really should be counted. And so we have to try to look a little deeper and see if there's more than just believing in Hashem, right? More than just believing that there's a commander. And it seems to be that most Rishonim do understand that it's not just a question of believing Hashem. We do come to that mitzvah already with belief in Hashem. Obviously, Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people stood at Har Sinai, were experiencing Hashem to whatever extent they could.
Yeah, they could not ignore it. Right.
So what was the actual mitzvah? So the Barbanel, the Malbim, who's a later sage, they understand that the Rambam is telling us the mitzvah includes knowing the basics of Hashem, not just knowing that Hashem exists, but knowing a few very important things, namely that Hashem is the only thing that we say truly exists. He's the only Metziut Amiti, and that thus he is the source of all that exists. And I found Rabbi Ori Bergman, I found this source a while ago, quotes the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that has a very interesting explanation of exactly what that means to understand these fundamentals. Judaism just doesn't just believe that there's some guy in the sky with lightning bolts that's going to strike you down if you don't listen to him, right? We believe that there is that which transcends the limits of finite reality, the laws of causation of time and space. Chazal often refer to Hashem as Hamakom, the place, so to speak. Nefesh HaChaim, one of the classical works of Jewish philosophy, explains it doesn't mean that Hashem is the Makom. He's the context of reality, which is to say, just like we have 3 dimensions, we have, or 11, depending on who you ask, and we have time, so too Hashem, in a certain sense, acts as that backdrop, the dimensions of reality, so to speak. So Hashem is, in a certain sense, that which is fundamentally more abstract than it. And this is what Hashem is telling us to believe. He's saying, not, I am to be your God, Ani, Anochi Elokecha, Anochi Hashem, Yud Ke Vav Ke.
Right.
The Tetragrammaton, as we say in English, right? The name of Hashem, which is really a contraction of 3 words: Haya, Hove, Ve'iyeh, past, present, and future. Hashem's not telling us just believe that you have a God. Believe that your God transcends time, transcends finite reality, the laws of causation. And then there's another element here, and this is something that Rav Hirsch is very passionate about. If you go through his commentary in the Chumash, not just that there's a primary mover and there's that which transcends space and time. Asher hotzesicha me'eretz Mitzrayim, I took you out of Mitzrayim. Hashem's telling us, you have to believe that I'm involved, that I care about you in a very intimate and detailed way. Hashem cares about our well-being. He's interested in us and as a collective and as individuals as well. And so we shouldn't see ourselves in a certain sense. I love the way Rav Hirsch puts it, shackled to circumstance nature. We're not a product of, a universe that was created eons ago by some uninterested being.
Right.
We're the product of Hashem's will every single moment, sustained with every single breath. So this, in a certain sense, again, we kind of saw the understandings of how you could read Anochi as a mitzvah, but then what the mitzvah is, these two elements of believing in the transcendent, and that transcendent being, which we term Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, cares about us. He has an interest in us as a nation and cares about us as individuals as well.
Okay. This was, I hate to stop you. I feel as if we could prolong this conversation for another hour, but I would prefer to let, tell our viewers and listeners that they must go and read the Parsha, read it carefully, because it's very interesting and one of the most complicated Parshas in the Torah. And we'll keep something for next year as well. So thank you so much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity and that. Be well.